The old man sat on a metal folding chair backstage, his hands resting on his knees. They were shaking just a little. Not much, but enough for him to notice. He pressed his palms down harder, trying to make them stop. Through the thin curtain, he could hear the sound of a piano. Someone was playing Chopin, and they were playing it well. Very well. The notes came fast and clean like raindrops on a window. The audience clapped when it ended. Not the polite kind of clapping. The real kind. The old man looked down at his shoes. They were old too, just like him. He'd polished them this morning, but they still looked worn. 73 years on this earth, and here he was, sitting backstage at a community center piano competition, feeling like a fool. He shouldn't be here. This wasn't for people like him. This was for the young ones, the talented ones. The kids who practiced 4 hours a day and had teachers with fancy degrees. He looked around at the other performers waiting their turn. Teenagers mostly. 16, 17 years old. They all had pristine sheet music in folders. They all looked confident. One girl was doing finger exercises in the air, her hands moving like she was already at the piano. A boy near the door had his eyes closed, probably running through his piece in his mind. They all belonged here. He didn't, but then he thought about his granddaughter. Sweet little thing, only 8 years old. She was sitting out there in the audience right now, probably on the edge of her seat. She'd been so excited when she told him what she'd done. "Grandpa, I signed you up for something," she'd said 2 weeks ago. Her eyes bright. He'd been reading the newspaper. "Signed me up for what?" "A piano competition. At the community center. Please don't be mad." He'd put down the paper. "Sweetheart, I haven't played piano in front of people in 40 years. But you're so good. I heard you playing at the music store last month." Everyone stopped to listen. That day at the music store, he remembered it. His granddaughter had dragged him inside, pulled him to the piano section. "Just play something, Grandpa." "Please?" And he had. Just a little bit. Nothing fancy. But people had gathered around. He'd forgotten about that part. "Those competitions are for serious pianists," he told her. "Young people with real talent." "You have real talent," she'd said. And she'd said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. He couldn't say no to her. He'd never been able to say no to her. So here he sat, waiting for his name to be called. Wondering what he'd been thinking when he agreed to this. The last time he'd performed for an audience was 1985. He'd been 33 years old. He and his wife had played together at their church's Christmas concert. Nothing professional, just for fun. She'd played the bass line and he'd played the melody. They'd laughed when they made mistakes. Nobody cared? It was just for the joy of it. His wife. God, he missed her. After she got sick, everything changed. The medical bills piled up fast. Insurance covered some of it, but not enough. Never enough. They had to make choices. Hard choices. One day, he'd looked at their piano, a beautiful instrument they'd saved for years to buy, and he knew what he had to do. He'd sold it. Got a decent price, too. Enough to cover 3 months of treatment. His wife had cried when she found out. "Not the piano," she'd said. "Not our piano?" "It's just a thing," he'd told her. "You're what matters." She'd held his hand. "Promise me you'll play again someday." He'd promised. But after she passed, he couldn't. For years, he couldn't even look at a piano without feeling that hollow ache in his chest. Music reminded him of her, of what he'd lost. So he just stopped until 3 weeks ago. When his granddaughter took him to that music store. Another round of applause snapped him back to the present. Someone else had finished their piece. That meant he was getting closer. There were maybe 3 more performers before him. He could still leave. He could just walk out the back door. His granddaughter would be disappointed, but she'd get over it. Kids always did, but even as he thought it, he knew he wouldn't leave. He'd made her a promise. Just like he'd made his wife a promise all those years ago. A young man walked past him, heading toward the stage. He couldn't have been more than 19. He was carrying sheet music for something that looked incredibly complicated. The old man caught a glimpse of the title, Rachmaninoff, Piano Concerto No. 2. That was serious music. Competition-level music? What was he doing here? He'd chosen something so simple. Too simple. When the competition organizers had asked him what he'd be playing, he told them the truth. They'd seemed confused. One of them had even asked if he was sure. It's a bit basic, they'd said, trying to be polite. He'd been sure then. Now he wasn't sure of anything, the Rachmaninoff started. Even backstage, even through the curtain, the old man could tell this kid was exceptional. The notes crashed and soared like waves in a storm. This was real talent. This was what judges wanted to hear. He closed his eyes and tried to calm his breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. His daughter had taught him that trick. She'd learned it in a yoga class or something. It helped a little. He thought about the piece he'd chosen. So simple, so basic. The first song his wife had ever learned to play. He taught it to her in their tiny apartment, back when they were newlyweds and couldn't afford much of anything. She'd said she had no musical talent, but he'd insisted everyone could learn this one. It had become their song. Not in a romantic way. Just in a life way. They'd played it together countless times. When their daughter was born, he'd played it in the hospital. When their daughter learned to walk, when she graduated high school, when she got married. Always that same simple melody, and at the end, in the hospice room, when his wife could barely keep her eyes open, he'd hummed it to her. She couldn't speak any more by then, but she'd squeezed his hand. She'd known the Rachmaninoff ended. The applause was thunderous. The old man opened his eyes. That was it. There were just 2 more performers before him now. His hands were still shaking. Maybe they wouldn't stop? Maybe that was okay. A woman with a clipboard appeared beside him. "You're up in about 10 minutes, she said kindly. She must have noticed how nervous he looked. "First time performing?" "In a long time," he said. "You'll do great," she said, though she couldn't possibly know that. He nodded and tried to smile. His granddaughter was out there waiting. That's what mattered. He'd play his simple song, the judges would be polite, and then they could go get ice cream like he'd promised. That's all this was. Just an old man keeping a promise to a little girl who believed in him. He stood up slowly, his knees protesting a little. He stretched his fingers, working out the stiffness. 2 more performers. Then it would be his turn. Then everyone would hear just how simple his choice really was. The next 2 performers went by in a blur. The old man heard them, but he wasn't really listening. His mind was somewhere else, drifting between past and present like a boat without an anchor. Then the woman with the clipboard was touching his shoulder. "You're up," she said softly. He stood. His legs felt strange, like they belonged to someone else. The woman smiled at him, encouraging, and pulled back the curtain. The stage lights hit him first, bright. Too bright. He squinted a little and started walking. Left foot, right foot. 1 step at a time. The piano sat in the center of the stage. A beautiful black grand piano that probably cost more than his car. The audience was bigger than he'd expected. Maybe 200 people? The community center had really promoted this event. He could see faces in the first few rows. Most of them looked confused. An old man in an old suit walking slowly to the piano bench. This wasn't what they'd been expecting, he heard someone whisper. Couldn't make out the words, but he knew the tone, uncertain, maybe even concerned. Was this part of the program? Was this some kind of mistake? The old man reached the piano bench and sat down carefully. The bench was the right height. That was good. Small mercies. He adjusted his position slightly, then looked down at the keys. 80 black and white keys, the same as every piano he'd ever played. But each one felt different. Each one had its own voice. He placed his hands on his knees. Not on the keys yet. He needed a moment. Just one moment to breathe. In the 3rd row, his granddaughter sat between her parents. She was leaning forward so far she was almost falling off her seat. Her hands were pressed together like she was praying. Her father had one hand on her shoulder, probably to keep her from jumping up and down. The judges sat at a long table to the right of the stage. 3 of them. 2 men and a woman. The woman in the middle was clearly the head judge. She had gray hair pulled back tight and glasses that sat on the end of her nose. She was looking at her papers, checking something. Then she looked up at him and gave a small nod. "Whenever you're ready?" But was he ready? Could anyone ever really be ready for something like this? The old man lifted his hands and placed them gently on the keys. The ivory was smooth and cool under his fingertips. He pressed down on middle C, just a light touch, not enough to make a sound. Just to feel it, the audience waited. The silence stretched out. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. Someone in the back coughed. The head judge looked at her fellow judges. One of them shrugged slightly. Maybe the old man had frozen. Maybe this was going to be awkward, but then his fingers moved. The first note came out clear and simple. Just one note, held for a moment, then another. Then the melody began. It took exactly 3 notes for people to recognize it. Heart and Soul, the simplest piano duet ever written. The song that every beginner learns. The song you play at parties when someone says, "Play something," and you don't really know how to play. The old man heard the shift in the room. Felt it, really. A kind of collective confusion. People looked at each other. Was he serious? Was this really what he'd chosen to play at a classical piano competition? After they'd heard Chopin and Rachmaninoff and Beethoven, one of the teenage performers backstage peeked through the curtain to see what was happening. When he heard what was being played, he almost laughed. Then he stopped himself. Something about the way the old man played it made laughing seem wrong, because yes, it was heart and soul, yes, it was simple. But the way the old man played it was different. Each note lasted just a fraction longer than it should have. Not enough to break the rhythm, but enough to give each one weight, meaning, like every note was a word in a sentence, and he was making sure you heard each word clearly. His left hand started playing the bass line, the part his wife used to play, the deep notes that gave the melody something to stand on. But he played both parts now, alone. His hands remembered the pattern like they remembered how to tie shoes or button a shirt. Some things the body never forgets. The audience didn't know what to think. A few people in the back were definitely confused. One man was checking his program, making sure he was at the right event. But some people in the front rows had gone very still. They were listening now. Really listening. The old man's eyes were closed. He wasn't seeing the stage or the lights or the audience anymore. He was seeing his apartment from 45 years ago. The tiny one-bedroom place with thin walls and a radiator that clanked at night. They'd been so young then, so broke, but so happy. He could see his wife sitting beside him on an old keyboard they'd bought at a yard sale. She'd been wearing that blue sweater she loved, the one with the hole in the elbow she kept meaning to fix but never did. "I can't do it," she'd said, laughing at her own clumsy fingers. "I'm tone deaf." "No such thing," he'd told her. "Everyone can play this song. Look, just these 4 notes. That's all you need." He guided her fingers, showed her where to press, and slowly, carefully, she'd played the bass line. Not perfectly. She'd hit a wrong note at least twice. But she'd played it. "I did it," she'd said, amazed at herself. "You did," he'd said, and kissed her cheek. Now, on stage, his fingers played both parts. Her part and his part, together but alone. The melody wove through the bass line like 2 people dancing, each one supporting the other. He added something then. A small variation. Just a little jazz inflection, a slide between 2 notes. Something he'd never played back then but had learned years later. His wife would have liked it. She'd always loved jazz. The head judge had put down her pen. She was supposed to be scoring this performance, making notes about technique and tempo and dynamics. But her pen just sat there on the paper, forgotten. She was listening with more than her ears now. In the audience, a middle-aged woman felt tears starting to form. She didn't know why at first. It was just a simple song. She'd heard it 1,000 times. But something about the way this old man played it reached into her chest and squeezed. Then she realized. Her mother used to hum this melody. Every morning when she made breakfast. Every evening when she did the dishes. It had been the soundtrack of her childhood, and she'd forgotten about it until this exact moment. Now her mother was gone. Had been gone for 3 years, and suddenly she was back. In the notes. In the spaces between the notes, the woman wasn't the only one. Across the audience, something strange was happening. People were feeling things they hadn't expected to feel. Remembering things they thought they'd forgotten. An elderly couple in the back row found each other's hands without looking. They'd played this song together on their first date 60 years ago. He'd played the melody, she'd played the bass. They'd been terrible at it, laughing so hard they could barely finish. A teenage boy wiped his eyes quickly, hoping nobody noticed. His grandfather had taught him this song. Just this song, nothing else, because that's all his grandfather knew how to play. His grandfather had died last summer, and they'd never said goodbye properly. The boy had been away at camp. He'd gotten home too late. The old man on stage kept playing, unaware of what was happening in the audience. Or maybe he was aware on some level deeper than consciousness. Maybe that's why he played it the way he did. He reached the bridge. The part where the melody shifts just slightly, becomes a little more complex for a moment before returning to its simple roots. His fingers knew exactly where to go. They'd played this transition 10,000 times. He thought about his daughter's birth. The NICU, the machines beeping. His tiny baby girl fighting for every breath. The nurses had said he could talk to her, that babies could hear their parents. So he'd hummed this melody, the only one he could remember in his panic and fear, and she'd made it. She'd lived. His daughter had grown up strong and healthy and had a daughter of her own, his granddaughter, sitting in the third row, tears streaming down her young face. The melody shifted again, softer now. The old man's touch on the keys became lighter, more delicate, like he was afraid of breaking something precious, like he was holding a memory that might shatter. If he pressed too hard, he was remembering his daughter's 5th birthday party. All the kids running around the backyard, hopped up on cake and juice. His wife had rented a small keyboard, set it up on the patio table. "Play our song," she'd said, so he had. And his daughter, tiny and gap-toothed, had climbed onto his lap. "Teach me, Daddy," she'd said. He'd guided her small fingers to the keys, just like he'd done with his wife years before. Just 4 notes. That's all she needed. She'd played them haltingly, with long pauses between each one, but she'd played them. And she'd looked up at him with such pride, such joy, that his heart had nearly burst. Now his fingers played those same notes, but they played them with 40 years of memory layered on top. Every time he'd played this song, every person he'd shared it with, all of it was there in the sound. Music had a way of doing that, of carrying time inside itself. The audience had gone completely silent now. No coughing. No whispering. No shuffling in seats. Just silence and music and breath. The head judge removed her glasses slowly. She rubbed the bridge of her nose, then her eyes. She'd been judging piano competitions for 28 years. She'd heard child prodigies play Liszt at age 12. She'd heard conservatory students perform pieces so technically difficult they seemed almost impossible. She'd heard it all, or she'd thought she had. This old man was playing a song that children learned in their first month of lessons. There was nothing technically impressive about it. No impossible runs or dramatic crescendos. No showing off. And yet she felt something stirring in her chest that she hadn't felt in years. When had she forgotten? When had music stopped being about feeling and started being about scores and rankings and technical precision? She thought about why she'd started playing piano in the first place. She'd been 7 years old. Her grandmother had an old, upright piano in the living room. Nobody in the family played it anymore, but her grandmother kept it tuned, kept it polished. Just in case, she'd say. One day, the young girl who would become this judge had pressed a key. Just one. The sound had fascinated her. So she'd pressed another, and another, and her grandmother had sat beside her and said, "Would you like me to teach you something?" The first song her grandmother taught her was Heart and Soul. The judge felt a tear roll down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. Let it fall. Her grandmother had been dead for 15 years. She hadn't thought about those early piano lessons in decades. In the front row, a young mother was holding her baby daughter. The baby had been fussy earlier, squirming and making little noises. But now the baby was perfectly still, perfectly quiet. Like even she could feel that something important was happening. The mother looked down at her daughter's face. The baby's eyes were wide, focused on the stage, on the old man at the piano. And the mother realized her own cheeks were wet. She was crying and hadn't even noticed when it started. Her grandmother used to hum this melody every single day, while cooking, while cleaning, while working in the garden. It had been the background music of the mother's entire childhood. Her grandmother had passed away just last month. Too soon, too sudden. A heart attack in the garden, surrounded by the tomatoes she'd planted. They'd played recorded music at the funeral. Classical pieces chosen from a list. Nothing personal. Nothing that really captured who her grandmother was. The mother had felt angry about that, but she hadn't known what to suggest instead. What song could possibly contain a whole person? A whole life? Now she knew. It wasn't about grand or impressive. It was about true, about real. This simple melody, played with real feeling, said more than a dozen complicated pieces ever could. The old man's playing grew even softer. He was approaching a part of the song that most people rushed through, eager to get back to the main melody. But he didn't rush. He let each note have its space, its time to exist. He was remembering the hospice room. The smell of antiseptic and flowers. The machines that hummed and beeped. His wife in the bed, her body so small under the white sheets. She'd always been petite, but illness had made her even smaller. Like she was slowly disappearing. She couldn't talk anymore by then. The cancer had spread to her brain, affecting her speech, her movement. But her eyes were still clear. Still her. Still the woman he'd loved for 45 years. He'd pulled a chair close to her bed, taken her hand. It was so thin he was afraid to squeeze too hard. "I'm going to play our song," he'd said. "Not on a piano. Don't have one here. But I'll hum it. You remember?" She'd blinked. Yes, she remembered. So he'd hummed it. The melody they'd played together 1,000 times. The bass line she'd always played. The song that had been the soundtrack of their life together, and she'd squeezed his hand. Weak, barely there, but he felt it. She was playing with him in her way. One last time, she'd died that night, while he slept in the chair beside her bed, still holding her hand. On the stage, the old man's playing wavered for just a moment. A note held too long. His finger pressed a key slightly off-center. Nothing that most people would notice. But he noticed. He steadied himself, breathed, continued. The teenage performer who'd played. Rachmaninoff earlier was still watching from backstage. He'd stayed because something had caught his attention, some quality in the music he couldn't name. Now he stood frozen, barely breathing. He'd spent 12 years learning piano. 12 years of lessons and practice and competitions. He could play pieces that looked like walls of black notes on the page. He'd won awards, got into a prestigious music school. Everyone said he had a real future, but when had he last felt anything while playing? Really felt something? He played to impress judges, to beat other competitors, to prove he was good enough. But this old man wasn't trying to prove anything. He was just sharing something true, something that mattered to him. The teenager felt something shift inside his chest. Like a door opening in a room he'd forgotten existed. In the audience, an elderly man sat alone near the back. He'd come to watch because his neighbor's kid was competing. But now he wasn't thinking about his neighbor's kid. He was thinking about his own wife. They'd been divorced for 20 years. His choice. He'd been an idiot, got involved with someone at work, threw away 30 years of marriage for something that lasted 6 months. Biggest mistake of his life? His ex-wife had remarried. Was happy, from what he heard. He was glad for her, truly. But some nights he lay awake and thought about everything he'd lost. Everything he'd thrown away. They used to play piano together. Not well, just for fun. And the song they'd played most often was this one. Heart and soul. Simple enough that even he could manage it. He hadn't thought about those times in years. Had trained himself not to think about them. Too painful. But now the memories came flooding back, and he couldn't stop them. Didn't want to stop them. The old man on stage played the final verse. His hands moved with the kind of confidence that only comes from having played something so many times it becomes part of your body. But there was nothing mechanical about it. Every note still carried intention, purpose, feeling. He added a small variation near the end, a gentle trill that wasn't in the original melody. Something he'd discovered years ago, playing around late at night when he couldn't sleep. His wife had loved it when he played it that way. Said it sounded like wind chimes. The audience leaned forward without realizing it. Even the people who'd been skeptical at first, who thought this was some kind of joke, were caught now, held by something they couldn't quite explain. Music, real music, didn't need to be complicated. It just needed to be honest. The old man's fingers moved toward the final phrases. He could feel the end coming, the way you feel the last pages of a book under your thumb. Part of him wanted it to last forever. Part of him was ready to let it go. His touch became even softer, so gentle that the notes seemed to float rather than sound. Like whispers instead of words. Like memories instead of music. In the fifth row, a man in his 40s sat perfectly still. He was a lawyer, successful, always busy. He'd come tonight because his secretary had gotten sick and given him her ticket. He hadn't wanted to come. Had a briefcase full of work waiting at home. But his wife had convinced him. When's the last time we did something just for the experience? She'd said. Now he was glad he'd come, though he couldn't have explained why. This simple melody was doing something to him, cracking something open inside his chest that he'd kept locked for a very long time. His father used to play piano. Not well, but enthusiastically. Every Sunday morning, he'd sit at the old upright in the living room and play whatever he could remember. Usually it was this song, Heart and Soul, over and over until the man's mother would yell from the kitchen, "For the love of God, play something else." But his father would just laugh and keep playing. The man hadn't thought about those Sunday mornings in years. His father had died when he was in college. A car accident. Quick, at least. But the man had been studying for finals when it happened. Had been annoyed when his mother called, interrupting his cramming session. Annoyed at the news that his father was dead. He'd felt guilty about that for 20 years. Carried it around like a stone in his pocket. But sitting here now, listening to this old man play his father's song, something shifted. Maybe his father wouldn't have wanted him to carry that guilt. Maybe his father would have understood. Would have told him to let it go. The man felt his wife's hand find his. She squeezed gently. She knew. Somehow, she always knew, near the back, a college student sat with her arms crossed. She'd come because she needed extra credit for her music appreciation class. She'd been checking her phone every few minutes, counting down until she could leave. But somewhere in the last few minutes, she'd stopped checking. Her phone sat forgotten in her lap. She was thinking about her little brother. He was only 10, had Down syndrome, and he loved music more than anything else in the world. He couldn't play instruments, couldn't read music, but he felt it. Really felt it. He danced to anything, his whole face lighting up with joy. Last week, she'd been impatient with him. He'd wanted her to listen to a song, had been so excited to share it with her. But she'd been busy, had homework, had friends texting her. Not now, she'd said, not even looking up from her phone. The disappointment on his face had been instant, complete, but she'd told herself she didn't have time. She'd listen later. Except later never came. There was always something more important. Sitting here now, she realized nothing was more important than that. Than her brother's joy. Than sharing something that mattered to him. She made a silent promise to herself. When she got home tonight, she'd ask him to play her that song. And she'd really listen. No phone, no distractions. Just him and her and the music he loved. The old man played the penultimate phrase. 3 more bars. That's all that was left. His hands knew it. His heart knew it. Everything was coming to an end. He thought about all the endings in his life. The end of his youth. The end of his marriage. Not through divorce, but through death, which was somehow both worse and better. The end of his career. He'd been an accountant, nothing glamorous, but he'd been good at it. Retired now. All of that was over, but endings weren't always sad. They were also completions, fulfillments. This song was ending. But it had been played, fully, honestly. That meant something. The head judge wiped her eyes openly now. She'd stopped trying to hide it. The two judges beside her weren't doing much better. One of them, a middle-aged man who prided himself on his objectivity, had his hand over his mouth. His shoulders shook slightly. He was thinking about his son. They'd been fighting for months now. Stupid stuff, mostly. His son wanted to study art, and he told him to pick something practical. "You can't make a living as an artist," he'd said, speaking from experience, from fear, from love, twisted into criticism. They hadn't talked in 3 weeks. His son wouldn't answer his calls. And sitting here, listening to this old man pour his heart into a simple melody, the judge realized he'd been wrong. Not about the difficulty of making a living as an artist. That part was true. But about what mattered. His son wasn't him. His son needed to find his own way, make his own mistakes, live his own life. And maybe, just maybe, what the world needed was more people willing to share their hearts, even if it didn't pay well. Especially if it didn't pay well, he'd call his son tonight. He'd apologize. He'd listen on stage. The old man played the final phrase. 4 notes, descending gently, like steps leading down to a quiet place. His left hand held a low note, grounding everything, while his right hand finished the melody. Then, instead of ending abruptly the way most people played it, he held the final chord. Let it sustain. Let it breathe. Let it fade slowly, naturally, the way things fade in real life. Not sudden, gradual, like watching the sunset. Like watching someone fall asleep. Like watching a life come to its natural conclusion. The sound dissolved into silence. The old man kept his hands on the keys, his eyes still closed. He wasn't ready to open them yet. Wasn't ready to come back from wherever the music had taken him. In that silence, something hung in the air. Something you could almost touch. The entire audience felt it. That moment between the last note and the first breath after. That space where nothing and everything existed at the same time. The old man's granddaughter sat frozen in her seat, tears streaming down her face. She was only 8 years old, but she understood something in that moment that many adults never learned. She understood that her grandfather hadn't just played music. He'd shared himself, his whole self, his love and his loss and his life. She understood why he'd been so nervous, why he'd almost said no. Because sharing yourself like that was the scariest thing you could do. Scarier than any competition. Scarier than any audience, but he'd done it anyway. For her, because she'd believed in him. Because she'd asked, a man in the back row was the first to move. He stood up slowly, almost unconsciously. He wasn't thinking about it. His body just knew what to do. He started clapping, but it wasn't the usual applause. It was slower, heavier, like each clap meant something. Then a woman beside him stood. Then another person. Then a whole row. Within seconds, the entire audience was on its feet. 200 people standing, applauding, many of them crying openly. But it wasn't just applause. Something else was happening. The young mother was hugging her baby tight, calling her own mother on the phone with shaking fingers. "Mom, I just needed to hear your voice. Can I come visit this weekend?" The divorced man in the back was typing a text message to his ex-wife. Just 4 words, "I am so sorry." The lawyer was thinking about calling in sick tomorrow. Spending the whole day with his kids. Really spending time with them. No phone. No work. Just being present. The college student was already texting her brother. "I'm coming home. Want to share that song with me?" The teenage Rachmaninoff player backstage was thinking about why he'd started playing piano in the first place. Not for competitions. Not for rankings. Because it felt good. Because it meant something. The judge was dialing his son's number, his hand trembling, hoping it wasn't too late to fix what he'd broken, all over the room. People were reaching for their phones, for the people next to them, for something real and true and immediate. The music had cracked them open somehow, reminded them of what mattered, of what they'd been ignoring or forgetting or putting off until later was now. Now was all they had. The old man finally opened his eyes. The standing ovation shocked him. He blinked in the bright lights, confused. All these people standing for him? For his simple song? He looked for his granddaughter and found her. She was standing on her seat, clapping with her whole body, her face shining with tears and pride and love. When she saw him looking, she waved frantically. He waved back, a small gesture, and smiled. His hands had stopped shaking. The applause continued for what felt like forever. The old man stood slowly from the piano bench, uncertain of what to do. He'd never received a standing ovation before. Never expected one. Especially not for this. He gave a small bow, awkward and unpracticed, then started walking off stage. His legs felt steadier now than when he'd walked on. Something had changed. Not in the world around him, but in him. Backstage, the woman with the clipboard had tears in her eyes. "That was beautiful," she said, her voice cracking. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." "Thank you," he said, not sure what else to say. It was just a simple song. But maybe that was the point. Maybe simple was enough, the remaining performers went on. A talented 17-year-old girl played Debussy with technical perfection. A boy played Bach with impressive precision. Each one was good. Really good. But something had shifted in the room. The audience listened politely, clapped appropriately, but the energy was different now. Quieter, more thoughtful. When all the performances were finished, the judges gathered to deliberate. The old man sat in the audience now, next to his granddaughter. She held his hand tightly, swinging her legs because they didn't quite reach the floor. "You were amazing." "Grandpa," she whispered. "I just played a simple song," he said. "It wasn't simple," she said, with the certainty that only children have. "It was perfect." The judges took longer than usual. Through the walls, people could hear muffled discussion. At one point, voices were raised, not in anger but in passionate disagreement. Then quiet again. More talking, finally they emerged. The head judge walked to the microphone on stage. She adjusted it with shaking hands, then looked out at the audience. Her eyes were red. She'd clearly been crying more. "This has been a very difficult decision," she began. Her voice wavered slightly. "In 30 years of judging competitions, I have never been more challenged by a decision." She paused, looking down at her notes. Then she looked back up, seeming to make a choice. "Before we announce the winners, I want to say something." "I need to say something." She took a breath. "When I started judging piano competitions, I believed that excellence meant technical perfection. The fastest fingers, the most difficult pieces, the fewest mistakes." Another pause. The audience waited. Tonight, I was reminded of something I had forgotten. Music is not about perfection. It's not about difficulty or complexity. Music is about truth. It's about sharing something real with other people. It's about making people feel. She looked directly at the old man sitting in the third row. One performer tonight reminded all of us why music matters, why we gather to listen, why we teach our children to play, not to win competitions or impress judges, but to connect, to remember, to feel alive. The old man felt his face grow warm. People were turning to look at him. His granddaughter squeezed his hand harder. "That said," the head judge continued, "we have criteria we must follow. Technical skill, complexity, execution. These things matter in a competition. And so our first place winner, by unanimous decision, is contestant number 12. The 17-year-old girl who'd played Debussy came forward, beaming. She deserved it. She'd been excellent." The audience clapped warmly. Second place goes to contestant number 8, the Rachmaninoff teenager. Also well-deserved. More applause. Third place, contestant number 15, the Bach performer. More clapping. The old man started to stand, ready to leave. He hadn't expected to win anything. Hadn't even expected to finish without embarrassing himself. But his granddaughter tugged his hand. "Wait," she whispered. The head judge held up her hand for quiet. "Now, in all my years of judging, we have never done what we're about to do. But the three of us discussed it, and we were unanimous. Sometimes the rules need to bend for something more important than rules. She pulled out a different certificate from the pile, one that looked hastily written. We are creating a special recognition tonight for the performance that moved us most, for the performer who reminded us why music exists. This is not about technique. It's about heart. It's about truth. And it goes to contestant number 6? The audience erupted. Not polite applause this time. Real applause? The kind that comes from the gut? People were standing again, shouting, cheering. The old man sat frozen. His granddaughter was jumping up and down. Grandpa, that's you. That's you? Go on, his daughter said from beside him, laughing and crying at the same time. Go get your award. He walked to the stage for the second time that night. His legs felt like they belonged to someone else again, but in a different way. Not from fear this time, from shock. From something he couldn't quite name. The head judge shook his hand firmly, then pulled him into a hug. Thank you, she whispered. You reminded me why I fell in love with music. I'd forgotten. She handed him the certificate. It read, Special Recognition for Music from the Heart. He looked out at the audience at all these faces he didn't know. But somehow, in the last hour, they'd shared something. They'd been connected by a simple melody and the truth behind it. I don't have a speech prepared, he said into the microphone. His voice sounded strange through the speakers. I wasn't expecting this. I wasn't expecting any of this. He looked down at the certificate, then back up. My wife taught me something. She taught me that it's not about being the best. It's not about being impressive. It's about being honest, about sharing what matters to you, even when it's scary. Especially when it's scary. His voice caught. He took a moment. She died 5 years ago. I stopped playing after that. Couldn't do it. It hurt too much. But my granddaughter reminded me that music isn't just about loss. It's also about love, about memory, about keeping the people we love alive in the things we do. He held up the certificate. This isn't my award. It's hers. It's for everyone who ever played a simple song and meant it. Thank you. More applause. More standing. More tears from people who barely understood why they were crying afterward. As people filed out, something extraordinary happened. 12 different people stopped the old man to talk. Not to congratulate him. To share, a woman told him about her grandmother who used to hum that melody. A man told him about his ex-wife and the mistakes he'd made. The teenager who played Rachmaninoff told him he was thinking about why he played piano. Really why, and could they talk sometime? The college student told him about her brother. The lawyer told him about his father. The judge told him about his son, voice breaking, saying he was going to call him tonight, going to fix things. Was it too late? It's never too late, the old man said. Not while you're both still breathing. Each conversation was brief but real, raw, like the music had given everyone permission to be honest, to be vulnerable, to share the things they usually kept locked away. His granddaughter stayed close the whole time, holding his hand, beaming with pride, on the drive home. She fell asleep in the back seat. His daughter drove, glancing at him occasionally in the rearview mirror. Mom would have loved tonight, she said quietly. She was there, he said. I felt her. In every note. 3 weeks later, something unexpected happened. The old man got a call from the senior center near his apartment. They'd heard about his performance. Someone had recorded it on their phone, posted it online. It had gone viral in the way that things sometimes do when they touch something true. Would he be interested in teaching piano? Nothing formal. Just sharing what he knew. They had an old piano in the common room that nobody played. It seemed like a waste. He said yes. His first class had 8 students, all of them over 65. He taught them heart and soul, not because it was easy, though it was, but because it was honest. Because it was a beginning. One woman cried while learning it. Said her husband used to play it before the Alzheimer's took his memories. When I play it, she said, I feel like I'm playing with him again. You are, the old man told her. Music does that. It keeps people alive. He went home that evening feeling something he hadn't felt in 5 years. Purpose, connection, joy. His granddaughter was at his apartment, doing homework at his kitchen table. "How was your first class, Grandpa?" "Good," he said. "Really good." "Told you," she said, not looking up from her math problems. "Told you that you should play again." "You did," he agreed. "Thank you for that. For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself?" She looked up then, smiled at him. "That's what family does." That night, after she went home, he sat at his kitchen table with a cup of tea. He thought about his wife, about the life they built together, about the simple melody that had been the soundtrack of their love. He thought about the competition, about all those people he'd connected with, all those stories he'd heard, about how one simple song had cracked open a room full of strangers and let the truth pour out. Music wasn't about being the best. It wasn't about winning or impressing or proving anything. It was about being honest, about sharing what was real, about connecting one human heart to another. His wife had known that all along. It had taken him 5 years to remember. He picked up his phone and looked at the photo that was his wallpaper. His wife on their wedding day, young and laughing, her eyes full of light and love and life. "I'm playing again," he told her picture. "Like I promised? Like you always wanted?" The photo didn't answer, of course, but he felt something shift in his chest. Something warm. Something like peace.